So the second part of the afternoon is focusing more on capacity management, and the format will be the same as we had earlier, with an hour or so of 20-minute presentations, and then we'll move into a panel discussion. Thank you so far for your active participation. As we said, everybody has a view on this issue in Edinburgh, and we look forward to continuing that conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Donald Emsley, the chair of ETAG. Donald.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me all right? I think I've switched my mic on. Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm delighted to be here. And so far, it's been a very good session, and I hope this afternoon will be similar. What I want to do is just go through a very brief agenda. My slides seem to be... All right, I hope that's not an omen for the future, but I just want to talk a little bit about who ETAG actually are, what we do, a brief history, because I think the history looking back is important, gives some context, talk about the challenge of what we're trying to do, and I think it's a challenge for us all. It's not just for the industry to solve, as we've heard about this morning. Within the delivery of the tourism strategy for 2030, I think there are solutions that we have heard about today that we can talk about. There's no doubt that technology is going to be key in that. And we also want to set out what success looks like. So when we get there to 2030 and beyond, what are the measures of success and what does success look like? So who are ETAG? Well, we're an umbrella organisation, and I've heard many people say before that if ETAG wasn't here, you'd probably go out and invent it and create it. And Harold this morning said that a grouping that talks about tourism that is representative right the way across the community is important. And that's what we are. ETAG is a group that includes the airport, the Hotel Association, museums, galleries, Historic Scotland, Essential Edinburgh, the Chambers of Commerce, the City of Edinburgh Council, tourist guides, Federation of Small Business, the attractions, the national agencies like Visit Scotland, and I apologise if I've missed anybody out, but that it gives you some idea of the scope from the very big organisations down to the small organisations, and everybody has a voice, and we all work together to deliver sustainable growth for the business and provide a great experience for visitors and residents, and that brings with it the economic benefits. Looking a little bit at the history, the tourism strategy was kind of outsourced to ETAG to deliver the 2020 tourist strategy, and it was published in 2012, and it was unashamedly about growth. And going to what Harold talked about, the KPIs were to grow the visitor numbers and nights by a third, increase the spending by visitors by 10%, spread the load across the seasons and across the calendar, and it was very successful as tourism grew from 2010 through to 2020 until the pandemic changed everything, and then the work of ETAG changed along with the City Council and the national agencies to assisting recovery. If I look at the tourism strategy for 2020, it was very, very successful. And I think we could all agree that perhaps it got out of balance in 2019. And we have, and I'm very pleased that Harold used these sayings as well, there are temporal and spatial issues that have arisen in Edinburgh as a result of tourism. And the industry is aware of the impact that tourism has, and I think we all have to work together to restore that balance. And I'm hoping that as I explain what we're trying to deliver with the strategy, that you can see that in terms of a conference that's talking about responsible tourism, the industry and the stakeholders in Edinburgh are being responsible about what they're trying to deliver and achieve over the next few years. And really it's about this challenge. How can we all as stakeholders across the visitor economy, and increasingly we are talking about the visitor economy because it is about jobs and economic development, and it includes residents and communities. How can we all work together and understand and address the impacts that a successful visitor economy has in the short term, while creating a city that we all want to live and work in the future. You've seen some numbers today, but it has been extraordinarily successful. And these are numbers from 2023, and some of them might vary as depending on who you speak to. But it is, Edinburgh has become a bit of a powerhouse as far as the visitor economy for Scotland. And we had 2.3 million international visitors, 2.7 million domestic visitors. The sector employs around about 37,000 people, over 2,000 businesses, and it's a £2.24 billion sector. The GVA that we recently monitored, and the recent figure we've got from 2021, so it's a bit out of date, obviously, was 533, very much affected by the pandemic, and it was down from 876 million in 2019. All of the evidence that I'm hearing from the operators in the city is that the demand and the capacity is now getting back up to the 2019 levels. Just a few thoughts on capacity, because this is a conference about capacity, and I do agree with some of the comments from this morning. It's very difficult to manage. It's almost impossible for legislation to say to hotel operators, stop selling rooms. So it's a question of the capacity that we've got, how do we manage it, and how do we spread it out to solve some of these temporary and spatial issues that we have. The latest figures that I've got from organisations around the city, it's just under 17,500 bedrooms, but there's another 3,000 in the pipeline. The short-term licences, there's around about 1,700 or just under 1,800 full licences, representing just over 7,000 rooms, and that doesn't include hostels and two-star hotels. So the capacity is growing. The accommodation capacity is growing, but so are the attractions. We're going to see later on this year, if it hasn't already opened, the Lost Shores out at Ratho is due to open, and at some point the music venue out at the Gyle will start to be developed. So all of these attractions are saying to the visitors, Edinburgh is an exciting and dynamic place to come to. But we haven't reached capacity in terms of the rooms, because the occupancy over the last 10 years in hotels in Edinburgh has stayed pretty constant at 82%, even though the rooms have grown from just over 10,000 to 17,000. And that, that says a lot for the operation of the hotels and what they're selling to the visitors, and also to Edinburgh itself as an attractive destination, whether it's the World Heritage Centre or the festivals that bring people here. And this doesn't include day visitors. Day visitors, I think the latest figure I saw, there's about 16 million day visitors. So we have to include that into our consideration for managing the capacity. And I think the management of the city, the visitor, is going to be the key task for the city and for the industry over the next few years. Given all of that as a context and what we've been through, ETAG again was commissioned by the city to produce the 2030 tourism strategy. And I think it's important to say this is not ETAG's strategy, it's not necessarily the city's strategy, it's everybody's strategy who is a stakeholder in Edinburgh, whether you work in the industry or whether you live in Edinburgh. Tourism affects us all, and I think we fully and frankly admit that and understand the impact that it has. But the strategy was taken from, while it's created from Edinburgh, the strategy also paid attention to Scotland Outlook 2030, which is the national tourism strategy, which is a responsible tourism for a sustainable future. So that's the national strategy and the aim. We looked at the climate strategy, Edinburgh City strategy, transformation strategy, the economic plan for Edinburgh City as well. So that all came together to produce the tourism strategy for 2030. And I think it's fair to say, and it may well be a surprise to many people of not being close to it, it's a very different strategic aim from the previous strategy. And it's to reinforce Edinburgh's position as a world-leading sustainable destination, promoting and preserving our celebrated cultural and historic city, supporting strong and sustainable economic growth, while positively influencing the quality of life for the city's residents and contributing to the Scottish visitor economy. So it's very different from grow the numbers by a third, increase the spend by 10%. This is recognising that tourism is growing, more people are travelling, and we have to manage it and manage it responsibly in a city like Edinburgh. And out of that strategy has come 5 strategic pillars, and Cami mentioned them earlier on this morning, but it is all about our people, our place, our environment, partnerships and reputation. And really that first and foremost, we have to work for the benefit of those who live and work and do business in the city, but look after the unique characteristics that have been talked about as far as Edinburgh is concerned in terms of the nature and the heritage centre for current and future generations. So what we had was the 2030 strategy with the strategic pillars, and out of that came the strategic outcomes that we wanted to deliver by 2030. So a thriving visitor economy, fair work, which included more and better jobs, ongoing investment in the city, a journey towards net zero, and most importantly, quality of life. And so we needed to create a vehicle to help deliver these strategic outcomes. And out of that came the action plan for 23 to 2025. It's been slightly delayed because the strategy was published in 2020, but as soon as we published the strategy, COVID hit and the industry closed down. So we're 2 years delayed in where we've actually got to. So this action plan for 23-25 was published in the spring of 2023. And we have 6 priority themes. So it's towards net zero, fair work and recruitment, visitor management, business engagement and support, data, AI and technology, and destination marketing and promotion. And from there, we wanted to create a delivery mechanism. And the debate, interestingly, this morning about whether you have a DMO or not, we took a different view and we created a hub and spoke model. And the reason for that was there's a practical reason in terms of it's expensive to create a DMO, whether it's a management or a marketing organisation. And there had been previous experience with an organisation in Edinburgh before. So we didn't want to go back there. And what we recognised was that there was highly experienced, motivated and talented individuals out there who were doing the work and didn't necessarily need a central organisation to do the work for them. And so we created this hub and spoke model. So the spokes are all about the delivery, and the hub in the centre is all about the coordination. And each of the 6 key themes have got a spoke, and within each of these spokes there is already set up an advisory group with experts who are setting their aims and objectives that are in alignment with the visitor strategy. And the hub is the coordinating point, and Karen Christie, who is the project manager who does all the coordination work, is in the auditorium today. And all this work is already started and it's ongoing, and we've got great support from industry, great support from the council and the universities to help us deliver this. I'm going to talk about 2 of them in particular, visitor management and data AI, because they might be more appropriate for this session today. But ETAG leads on the business engagement, because if we want to deliver and push the industry towards a net zero future, we have to engage the businesses within the industry to be able to do that. We have to give them the tools and the ability to be able to do that, and that's what ETAG will do. Destination marketing and promotion, I think it was mentioned this morning, Forever Edinburgh, and Fiona Hunter and her team at Forever Edinburgh have done a great job over the last few years. Like Visit Scotland, we took the opportunity to remind the consumer during COVID shutdown that Edinburgh was still here. Edinburgh wasn't going anywhere, and we would welcome you back whenever you wanted to come back, and kept reminding them that Edinburgh was a great place to visit. And a lot of the work is ongoing with these advisory groups and working closely with some of the organisations around the city. If I look first at visitor management, the aim of the visitor management is we're trying to manage the visitor to solve these spatial and temporal issues in a way that protects our environment, respects our communities, enhances the experience of our visitors, and supports a thriving tourism sector. The industry realises that if the visitors are going to come and enjoy being in Edinburgh, come back to Edinburgh, they need to have a good experience. And that's something that we will set out to achieve. And each one of these areas has their own plan, their aims and their objectives that tie back into the delivery of the strategy. And it's very geared toward linking in towards making sure that while we're managing a lot of these issues around the city, then we are paying attention to our journey towards net zero and the destination marketing and the other hubs that we look at, the other spokes that we look at. One of the key ones that I've said will be data, AI and technology, and we're doing a huge amount of work with the Edinburgh Universities and the Edinburgh Futures Institute on a lot of these issues. And we want to position Edinburgh as a leader in data-driven destination. Data came up this morning, and it's a question of, we've got lots of data, but how much data do you want? But more importantly, what data do you want and what are you going to do with it? And that is a question that we are looking at and looking to try and solve. Around the ETAG table, one of the first areas that we will look at is getting data from each of our members who can provide the data that they look at and that they analyse into one source of data that we can then use in order to be able to substantiate what we've been doing and whether we've been successful at delivering the strategy. But other data projects that we're looking at with the Edinburgh Future Institute is to better manage transport during the peak August festival season and helping local people go about their daily lives with fewer problems. We're working, the data AI group is working with the council on new technology tools to highlight great things to do outside of the key hotspots. Amsterdam had a great success in focusing people. They had congestion around the Anne Frank and the Guggenheim Museum, and they simply suggested that from research they discovered that everybody wanted to go to Anne Frank Museum in the morning and the Guggenheim in the afternoon. And they said, well, maybe you need to think about doing it the other way to reduce the demand and reduce congestion. And these are the sort of things that we will be looking at, using data on a regional basis to help people discover more around the surrounding area. And we've got a lot of ambition to do a lot of more projects in the future. But the technology will certainly help us move and spread the tourists around the city to go and look at things that perhaps they wouldn't want to. Caroline mentioned this morning that if you come into Edinburgh, you go to the castle, you go to the grass market, you might go to Holyrood, and then you leave. But there's an awful lot more that the city can offer that's different from that. And as travellers become a little bit more sophisticated, we heard from Caroline this morning, they're looking for more experiential visits. They're looking for more immersive visits. And Fiona Hunt and her team at Forever Edinburgh are doing as much as they can to promote and help the visitor move round the city. One option, and it's looking at technology, is to use satellite data. And I don't know if many of you know Josh Ryan at the Edinburgh Institute, Futures Institute, but a couple of years ago, the one on the right-hand side is, you can see the two red-hot areas. No surprising that is the Royal Mile, the Princes Street, and the Grassmarket, and they used people searching using their mobile phones, and they got the data in an experimental during a research experiment. They got the data from the Edinburgh City Wi-Fi as to where people were logging on to their phones, and no surprise, the red hot areas were in the areas where we would all expect a vast majority of the tourists to be. And more recently, he's looking at using satellite data and linking it with mobile phones as to where the visitors are, and how we can then send them messages and plans as to how they might go and visit other areas of the city. I'll mention very briefly, I know I'm coming up against my time, the visitor levy. We've already heard it's about 40 to 50 million a year. This underpins the delivery of the tourism strategy. The legislation and the guidance delivered by the Scottish Government and Visit Scotland is very clear that this is spent in relation to delivering the tourism strategy, and it should be additional. And this is transformative for Edinburgh. You know, this is 50 million a year, across 10 years, it's £500 million, and this requires, I think, quite ambitious plans. What we don't want to do in 10 years' time is sit there and look back and say, where did that money go to? We have to look back and say, my goodness, look at what that visitor levy delivered for the residents of Edinburgh, but also the visitors. And just lastly, before I finish, I mentioned that we needed to look at what will success look like in 2030. And each of these strategic outcomes will have a narrative and measures of success that we have looked at, that how we measure by 2030 whether we've got there and whether it's been a success or not. And I think the one that's most important, I think, is the better quality of life. And I think it's indicative of where this strategy is. It's about growth, because we need growth to fill to effectively to manage, help the businesses reach their demands, targets, and pay for their investment. But actually, more importantly, it's about the people of Edinburgh. You know, that they love their city, but they want it to be vibrant, inclusive, accessible, and it's about working with communities. And the success of the visitor economy in our book will be delivered by the improvements in the day-to-day lives of the resident in the city. But it's all about a dialogue. I think this is a start of a conversation over the delivery of the strategy. Tomorrow night, Karen and I are going to the Association of Community Councils to talk to them about the strategy, because we need to hear their voice. We need to hear the community councils and learn what they understand they want for their communities and the challenges they're finishing. But it's the start of a dialogue. Very pleased to be here and very pleased to carry the dialogue on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donald. We'll pass over now to Julian and Grant.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming here today, and also to credit the previous panel and the members of the audience for the really thought-provoking and perceptive discussion earlier. I'm sure it will enrich our panel's discussion to follow. My name is Julian Grant. Well, Dr. Julian Grant, as of a couple of months ago, so I'm still getting used to. And I'm glad to be here today to draw out connections between two heavily touristed places that I know very well. As a researcher and former resident, the North Highlands, and strictly as a resident, Edinburgh. So in my presentation, I will introduce you to my PhD research, which focused on the impact of tourism in communities around the North Coast 500. Returning to some of the themes raised in the previous discussion, I was interested in developing a toolkit for understanding what Professor Lennon describes as the social and cultural carrying capacities of communities around the NC 500. So I'll outline my findings, link them to the context of mass tourism here in Edinburgh, and then close by setting out a set of prompts for future action in this city concerning the challenges and opportunities involved in tourism. So the North Coast 500 is an interesting tourism initiative in that it has been an attempt to create a massive new interlinked open-air tourist destination where previously there were many small, relatively marginal destinations that were spread far apart. This is unlike Edinburgh, which is highly centralized and well established with really hundreds of years of people coming to visit the city. The NC 500 was launched in 2015 by the North Highland Initiative with support from Highlands and Islands Enterprise. It's essentially a signposted marketing ploy that encourages tourists to travel around a 516-mile long route encompassing the northernmost portion of the Scottish mainland. So that's from Inverness, John O'Groats, Cape Wrath, down to Applecross and back to Inverness, or if you want the other way around. Despite the marketing language you see here in the top right of coming to visit the road that never was, all of these roads already existed, and no new infrastructure was initially created for the route, with the exception of science. So, recognizing that the North Highlands were somewhat off the map of established tourist destinations in Scotland, the NC 500 represented an attempt to capitalize on the natural and cultural assets in the North Highlands and to generate economic opportunities for the area. Towards this end, a private company, North Coast 500 Limited, was established in order to promote the route. This company holds the trademark, and it makes its money through corporate sponsors and local business partners who advertise through its channels. And it also sells memberships to visitors, giving them access to merchandise and discounts and itineraries and a guide to the route. Now, through a combination of really effective mass marketing, the increasing popularity of route tourism as a way of being a tourist, and the growth of the Highlands as a visitor destination, the NC 500 quickly attracted increased numbers of visitors to the north. From the start, the route had high volume, fast-moving, wide-ranging, and highly individualized travel in its DNA. Now, these characteristics were central to a host of interlinked controversies which began to attract attention from 2018 onwards or so. So a 2019 Guardian article observed that the route has proven phenomenally popular, attracting hordes of campers, classic car drivers, and endurance cyclists every year, and with them some unintended consequences such as littering, antisocial behavior, and overstretched infrastructure. These tensions reached a fever pitch in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, as Scotland came out of lockdown, generating widespread and often really heated discussions about the impact of this new form of tourism and how it might be better managed. And these debates in the North Highlands are in turn part of a wider global recognition that's spread here to Edinburgh as well of the damaging consequences of mass tourism. Residents, activists, politicians, and academics use the term over-tourism to describe tourism pressures which are out of balance with local needs and threaten the social, environmental, and cultural sustainability of host communities. This narrative of over-tourism and the sort of lived reality from which it springs can be found across the globe in both rural and urban areas, and in particular in hotspots such as Venice, Mallorca, Barcelona, Skye, and yes, Edinburgh as well. So this is the background from which my PhD sprung. I was awarded a fully funded studentship from the European Social Fund and was given the fairly open-ended brief of involving local communities in the exploration of tourism and community heritage around the North Coast 500. So I moved first to Sutherland and then to Caithness, and as I began speaking to local residents and people involved in tourism, a direction of research began to emerge that was based on three principal objectives. So this first objective means undertaking a more comprehensive and nuanced study of the NC 500 than has been attempted before. By situating the route in its historical context, I was interested in exploring how present-day tourism and the tensions and debates it generates are related to much deeper-rooted socio-political issues outside the realm of tourism, and also to wider issues of identity and culture under threat. This involves asking, how are rural places represented in popular culture, media, and marketing? How are land and resources owned and used? And in what ways does tourism intersect with inequalities of wealth and power? And what role, positive and negative, does tourism play in the challenge of ensuring a sustainable social and economic future for Highland communities? The second objective has to do with the role that tourism plays in local people's everyday lives. This involved using research methods that focus not on macro-scale trends and quantitative indicators such as visitor traffic, economic activity, but instead on individual residents' experiences, their opinions, and their actions. So this is a way of understanding tourism from within, from the bottom up, as expressed in people's own words and in their own terms. Then the final objective is a more sort of socially engaged and public-facing one. I sought to direct the research outwards through community-generated public exhibitions which would make visible aspects of local life that residents themselves would like to share with visitors, if given the chance. And by extension, I sought to sort of encourage dialogue between residents and visitors about the impact of tourism locally. So fieldwork for my PhD took the form of 3 case studies around the route, the NC 500. The first one was in Castletown and Caithness, the second in the seaboard villages of East of Ross, and the third over on the west coast, where perhaps the negative impacts of tourism have been felt most keenly, in Assynt and Sutherland. In each of these places, I partnered up with a local community heritage organization to set up a community-generated research project. This partner organization helped set me up with a group of local residents from different walks of life who would be interested in participating in the research. So working from the rather loose prompt of exploring their personal relationships with tourism, place, and heritage, these participants each used a disposable film camera with 39 shots, plus or minus a couple. So they took photographs of these cameras as they went about their daily lives, and they shared and discussed these stories behind their photos in a series of interviews and group discussions, then selected a handful of their pictures and wrote captions to go into public exhibitions which were held in person in the case study location and also online. And then this process was repeated in each of the case studies, together giving a really rich and multifaceted view of how local people around the route interpret the presence of tourism in their lives. So I'll now briefly share with you several photographs and captions which were prepared by participants in these research projects, in hopes that they give you some insight into the kind of richness and variety and usefulness of the perspectives that they shared with me. So these first 2 showcase maybe some of the more optimistic or hopeful sides of tourism, by showing us here on the left the sort of backstage version of a really familiar symbol in tourist iconography. Muriel Murray from Castletown invites us into her way of seeing as a local. The fishing boat, so often seen in Instagram posts or postcards and things, is tucked away, it's out of the water, it's tucked away on a side street, alongside the kind of vital and unromantic equipment that keeps it going. And in her caption, which she wrote for the exhibition, she also located this scene in the really practical considerations of earning a living and negotiating the shifting tides of international trade. So it's not just a scenic symbol, it's a living, working reality. And then on the right, Rod Mackenzie from Hilton is shown here planting a row of sunflower seeds for flowers to grow in the spring to bring some cheer to tourists and locals alike coming out of COVID. For Rod, him and his wife run an Airbnb from their home. They also are farmers, and tourism is an important part of their life. And where they live on the coast of East of Ross, it has not yet reached a level where it has become problematic. But these 2 images, which both come from Assynt, illustrate some of the more complicated and negative dimensions of it. This is taken from one of the participants' front doors, showing one of the regular processions of camper vans that goes past on the little single-track road outside her home. This is the caption she wrote. She also described, and I can't think of a more eloquent description of a carrying capacity than what she said. that there's too much to cope nowadays. It's just gone too far. We all accept there will be tourism and busy summers, but now they're here all year round. The roads are a mess, and all of these things just get to people. And on the right, photograph taken by Marianne McLean shows an example of a concrete form of resistance taken by locals to mitigate the negative impacts of the NC500 there. That's a little grassy patch near Drumbeg, where often camper vans would park for free overnight, leave litter, leave fires burning overnight. Over the course of several summers, this became a repeating issue to the extent that a group of crofters dug a ditch, put up some stones, and wrote this, spray painted this sign. And you can see the toll it takes on these people to have to take such drastic steps to try and mitigate a problem that's not of their own making. And then these two images are examples of where local cultural heritage, that kind of cultural carrying capacity, gets mobilized into a form of resistance to tourism. Anne invoked the history of the Highland clearances in Assynt, which also has a history of a more recent history of a community buyout. So the Assynt Crofters Trust purchased that estate in 1996. And for her, tourism is kind of the latest incarnation of a series of threats over the last couple hundred years to the sustainability of her way of life and her presence on the land. So here she took a picture of her daughter next to the home of her great-great-grandfather as a kind of claim on the land. And then this is also just one of the many different perspectives that are involved in tourism. Not everyone is positioned to benefit from it. Not everyone wants to benefit from it. And yet, even those people have to live with its consequences. So again, we have another eloquent statement of what it means when we reach a social and cultural carrying capacity and exceed that carrying capacity. So there are hundreds more pictures. There's so much more I'd like to share with you, but I'll move on to the sort of findings that emerged. First of all, it's important to emphasize that the responses to tourism are diverse and they're complex and they're sometimes contradictory. Rather than conforming to a partisan for or against perspective, most people make some or part of their living from tourism or have benefited personally from the increased traffic brought by the route. It's deeply interwoven into their lives. Many spoke of positive encounters with visitors and expressed an openness to the possibilities, both economic and intercultural, that are inherent in tourism. And yet, across all these varied experiences, several shared themes emerge which indicate that the NC500 has exceeded that region's carrying capacity. The first is a set of dramatic changes to the scale and form and intensity of tourism in the region. The highly mobile form of tourism increases road traffic and leads to frustration around inconsiderate or negligent or inexperienced driver behaviors. And the NC500 is also characterized by shorter average stays, which is the bane of every hospitality owner's existence, as visitors tend to move quickly around the route, one-night stays causing many changeovers. And many residents feel that this high-volume, fast-moving format impedes real connection between local residents and tourists. Marianne McLean, who runs a shop in Assynt, observed that people used to stay for a week and you'd get to know them. Then they'd come back the next year and you'd remember them. And now people are just flying through. And Anne McCrimmon reflected that I think there are an awful lot of people doing the NC500 who are just ticking a box to say we've done it, and they're not really interested in the communities they're going through. In other words, the popularity and inherent mobility of the NC500 makes tourism a less livable proposition for local people. Then there's also an array of much more material, concrete issues arising from stresses on overstretched infrastructure and the availability and affordability of housing. And these are issues that will be very familiar here in Edinburgh. There's been a dramatic shortage of important forms of infrastructure that would support this kind of road-based traffic. There's an agreement with a route to promote properties around the route as investment opportunities, as business opportunities, and all of these have the effect of crowding out local people from the homes they grew up in. There's also the question of power and profit. Who benefits? And I'd just like to raise here that it's telling that the largest shareholder in North Coast 500 Limited is Wildland. Limited, which belongs to Scotland's wealthiest man and largest landowner, Anders Paulson, who in turn has extensive land holdings and hospitality ventures around the North Highlands that are well positioned to benefit from the NC 500. So this sense of powerless feeds into a real history of feeling disenfranchised and not benefiting from these extractive industries that have moved through. There's also these problematic ways of representing Highland people and places, and in turn the emergence of different resident campaigns ranging from advocacy and drawing awareness and advocating for policy to do with tourism, to concrete acts like digging ditches and putting stones in place, and also to the work of artists and heritage practitioners who are weaving alternative locally generated narratives of their place. Now, I'm aware that time is ticking away, so I'll move very quickly through here, recognizing that others are more qualified to speak about the case of Edinburgh, but the convergences are pretty clear. There's a widespread, though not universal, perception that the tourism industry no longer benefits everyone in the city. This is perhaps particularly acute in the Old Town, but it intersects with the wider atmosphere of austerity in which public assets which are of benefit to the city's working class communities are being sold off or closed. Community centres, and most recently the temporary closure of the People's Story Museum. And yet there's a huge amount of money flowing through, so the question is, where does it go? Now, moving quickly through, here's some final prompts for further action. The first is to change the way we seek to understand the impact of tourism locally. This means moving beyond surveys and formalized consultation processes to a more creative and transparent and inclusive participatory research. And we should also seek to really not just tokenistically incorporate local people into this process, but embed local residents in the process of generating knowledge about tourism. Second, it's only right that profits go towards meeting acute social needs, and I'm glad to hear that the visitor levy takes a step in this direction, but I think the people of Edinburgh need to be convinced that its revenues are going where they should, towards social housing, improved transport and infrastructure, and supporting vital public services. Need to resist, on a link note, the market-driven reorientation of housing infrastructure and services towards tourism, and a need to bring the rich cultures and lived experiences of contemporary Edinburgh residents more squarely into the line of sight of tourists. Rather than relying on the long-established tropes of medieval splendor and squalor and Harry Potter, we should foster resident involvement in the creation of new place narratives that honor the ongoing life of the city. I'd like to close with a slogan that's been central to residents' campaigns against over-tourism in Latin American cities, which is that sin habitantes no hay patrimonio. So without inhabitants, there is no heritage. And that's what we should have at the center of our way of thinking about tourism. I think I'm just over 20 minutes. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Julian. We'll pass to Louise Todd.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's really lovely to be here today with so many people in the room and have heard so many interesting presentations. My name's Louise Todd, and today I'm going to present an overview of a project that I've recently been working on with my colleague, Professor Anna Leask. We're based in Edinburgh Napier University in the Tourism Research Centre, which sits within the Tourism and Intercultural Business Communication subject in the business school. So the project fits well with the themes of today's conference because it's very much concerned with the views of stakeholders of Edinburgh as a tourism and festival city and a destination. We were particularly interested in finding out about stakeholders' perceptions around Edinburgh's sectors in terms of over-tourism, community engagement and placemaking. And our project was funded by the Royal Society of Edinburgh, small research grants. Oh, I haven't moved on. There we are. My apologies. Okay. So, yes, you can now see who we are. Anyway, right, sorry. So, Royal Society of Edinburgh funded research project. And as I was saying, we're based in the Tourism Research Centre at Edinburgh Napier University. Okay, so the scope of the study was to investigate stakeholders' engagement. And Anna and I are both, we both research tourism and festivals in Edinburgh. We also work locally, and we're both residents of the city as well. And for quite some time, we've been thinking about some of the ongoing debates and discussion around tourism and festivals within the city. As we've seen today, and as many of the other presenters have said, there are lots of voices with varying perceptions about this. And this is seen in terms of the scale and timing of the festivals and the tourism activity in the city. Most of the presenters today have mentioned the temporality and spatial issues that we see across the city. We've also noticed an increased level of concern and criticism from some particular groups. And because of this, we were particularly keen to investigate how the sectors could deliver more sustainable community engagement. So the scope of our study was really to look quite closely at stakeholder engagement, and our approach was intended to be highly collaborative and participative. We were very interested in speaking to people and gaining their opinions and what was going on. So today I'm going to talk a bit about how we went about doing that. So our approach was interviews with some key informants and then some participatory public engagement workshops that used a creative method to gather data. I'll then spend a little bit of time talking about the outcomes. So our research, I'll mention at this point, is an initial study. So we were looking to gain an overview of what some of the issues were and perhaps start to think about what some of the solutions might be. And the next steps of the project, we'd very much like to look more closely at what the solutions are. Okay. I'll not spend too long on Edinburgh because we all know quite a lot about Edinburgh. But the background to research was underpinned by some of Edinburgh's own context and its featured. It is a UNESCO inscribed World Heritage Site. However, the centre of the city is a popular visitor attraction as well as being a historic place. As a space, there's been growing perceptions around the commodification of the historic centre, particularly around about where we are at the moment. And this has led to perceptions of top-down decisions being made with little involvement from locals, from the people who actually live here. Of course, as well as being a popular destination, Edinburgh is a living city with residents, communities, local businesses, visitor attractions, and so on, so many others. And they all have competing interests and priorities. The city has a reputation of being the world's leading city for festivals, and annually, we're all aware it stages numerous festivals and events throughout the year, and some would say on an almost continuous basis. Oh, we seem to have the slides in the wrong order. Okay, I might come back to that. So, right. Okay. So I'll just find where I am. No, I seem to be missing a slide. Never mind, I'll explain. Okay, so right, when we first started to discuss the ideas for this project, Scotland had actually just entered the first COVID lockdown of the pandemic in early 2020. A few years before then, as everybody is aware, and we'd seen, there'd been growing debate and discontent about tourism, and specifically over-tourism, which was seen across the media and from local communities. And this wasn't only in Edinburgh. We've heard examples today, similarly across other European cities, for example, Barcelona, Amsterdam, Venice, amongst others. So Edinburgh and its counterparts were increasingly being positioned as for tourists rather than for their residents. In particular, there was criticism over the use of the historic centre of Edinburgh for festivals and commercial agendas, overusing events and festivals to bolster tourism. Then, of course, came 2020 and there were no tourists. And of course, that's a completely different story. However, we noticed that once the tourism activity returned to the city, then so did the debate. So, yes, okay. So these are just some of the pre- and post-COVID examples of what we were looking at in the media. You've probably seen similar headlines and stories all over the place. The stories mainly based around the summer festivals and the winter festivals, the use of space, the affordability of being in Edinburgh, and so on. So our initial question going into the research was, what are the key issues around sustainable engagement for Edinburgh's tourism and festival sector and for its local communities. It was really important for us to have this multi-view from different stakeholder perspectives. And this framed our 3 research questions, as we can see here. How can Edinburgh's tourism and festival sector meet the needs of local communities effectively? How can initiatives be encouraged to enhance locally relevant and sustainable tourism and festivals? And how can urban space in Edinburgh, particularly its historic centre, be used to meet the needs of the local community and the tourism and festival sector? We decided to try and find some answers to these questions by speaking to key people and organisations in the city who were stakeholders of the tourism and festival sectors. And when we did this, we used this existing framework that we previously designed for another piece of research. And we were particularly keen to speak to who we referred to as secondary stakeholders. Now, secondary stakeholders in the context of Edinburgh as a festival and tourism destination are people and groups who are essential to Edinburgh and as a place to live in, work in, study in, and so forth. However, they may not be essential to the delivery and continuance of the festivals and tourism. That said, there's a lot of overlap, and our previous research found that people tend to fall into numerous stakeholder categories when we're talking about destinations and places that they live in. So we, from there, started the first stage of our research, which involved interviews with 6 key stakeholders of the tourism and festival sector. Within that, we included community groups, civic representatives, different organisations and businesses, some of which were tourism and festivals focused, others that weren't. The interviews took place between February and April of this year, and they involved discussions around the informant's perceptions of any issues around tourism and festivals. At this stage, we also discussed some potential solutions from their perspectives and examples of good practice. And it's important to bear in mind here that everybody we spoke to, more or less everybody we spoke to, had a particular stakeholder role, but they tended to also be residents within the city. There were 3 main themes that emerged at this stage, and we used these to design the next stage of the research. You can see here their community engagement over tourism, particularly in the historic centre, and space and time, this idea of space, the temporality, and the spatial issues that we've been hearing about. The second stage of the research involved 2 workshops. These were participatory, and we were very keen to facilitate a 2-way process of generating data. So we framed these within a public engagement research framework. This meant that the data was going to be co-created. The participants were contributing fully to the research data being produced, and outcomes would therefore be co-designed. For this purpose, we used visual facilitation. So this was undertaken with drawing and photography. We employed an artist to come in and capture the discussions as they took place. And this recorded the discussion and findings. The first workshop took place in May and the second in June of this year. The first one involved a mapping exercise, mapping Edinburgh's festivals and tourism sectors and activity to a map of the city. And the second used the place standard tool, which some of you might be familiar with because it's used in the Scottish Government for local place planning activities. So there is just a quick image from workshop 1, just to give some overview of the approach that we took in terms of the visual facilitation and the mapping exercise. And we have also a similar image from workshop 2, which used the place-making framework. Okay. Oh. Right, missing the text on this slide, but I'll move on just to talk a bit about some of the issues that were uncovered during the workshops that related to the themes. This slide is supposed to say over-tourism, but in terms of over-tourism, a lot of the discussion during the workshops fell into this area of what does over-tourism actually mean for Edinburgh? Is it to do with volume, capacity? Is it to do with the impact or the perceived impact of tourism? And also, how can over-tourism be measured? Most of the thinking around this topic reflects the conversations that we had in the workshops, which was quite interesting and good to see in many ways. The range of quite often subjective voices that we hear was raised in terms of over-tourism. This included references to the media reports, and particularly some of the stories being reported from the European cities earlier this year. Barcelona and Water Pistols and so on has already been mentioned. The lack of connection between the fabric of the city and communities was discussed, with questions over how to balance the needs of locals with tourism. Safety issues and dispersal of crowds was discussed, and issues were raised there in terms of pinch points, particularly here in the Old Town during the summer. Rather than focusing on the festivals themselves, there were issues also reported over there being too many large-scale events taking place in the city. So this wasn't focused on the summer festivals, the winter festivals, this was more focused on sporting events, large concerts, and so on, and there being a lack of timely communication about these. And this all relates to the next issue over how it was felt that sometimes one partner's decisions would have negative impacts upon others. And finally, the cost of growth to the city's reputation came up. So I've just summarised what would have been on that slide. And the illustration there, I'll just point out at this stage, is taken from the artist's work during the workshops themselves. Oh, this one does have information. So the second series of issues that came up were around community engagement. And much of the discussion around the issues here were related to how this can be managed, along with who's responsible for communication, and so who owns and coordinates community engagement. In fact, does anybody own and coordinate community engagement? The idea of the echo chamber came up, this process of how can the voices that we hear be representative of the full breadth and width of the communities of Edinburgh and not just be the loudest voices. Also, how could different communities be engaged despite the negative media coverage? Could perceptions and reality be communicated over visitor numbers and their behaviours? And the impact on residents and business. Finally, how could some of the negative narratives be shifted towards collaboration and solving issues and communicating benefits? Yes. The temporal and spatial issue came up as one of the main themes, and the use of space for tourism and events and the timing of related activities raised many issues. These were related to the concentration of activities in the historic centre and the intensity of those taking place over the summer period, largely between June and early September. Dispersal was a major theme in terms of the physical space across the city and throughout the year, with a lot of discussion around moving the activities away from the historic centre. However, around that there was a bit of debate about would other communities of Edinburgh have the infrastructure, the access and transport required, and would they actually welcome some of the tourism and festival activity? Another issue was discussed around how we can recognise the benefits for the city versus the impact upon different areas or places. And this led to discussion about authenticity of the historic centre over the summer months. A final point which repeatedly came up was disruption caused to residents in the summer. Road closures, price increases, issues with public transport, that came up a lot. This idea of trying to get around the city and walking through spaces that, and the amount of time, for example, it could take at certain times of the year. The final set of issues being covered were around the challenging landscape that not just Edinburgh in particular, but we're all living in at the moment, this being far more widespread. But there were issues, as we see here, for residents, for businesses and visitors, mainly over the cost of living crisis, but also some of the external forces out there that we've been dealing with for the last few years. Okay, so although this research was an initial study, we set out to try and uncover some of the issues. We began to think about what some of the potential solutions might be, and these came up within the workshops as well and were captured within the visual facilitation. Now, in terms of potential solutions, a series came up around communication, and a potential solution here was to work towards better communication of the benefits. For example, the Forever Edinburgh Resident Awards, this idea of offering discounts to attractions, hospitality and so on for anyone with an Edinburgh EH postcode. Ticket discounts for the festivals. A discussion around, are local residents aware there are ticket discounts for some of the festivals? Do we know about these things? Another solution was to work harder to align people's perceptions with reality, whatever that might be, trying to communicate the value of tourism and festivals to the city, the benefits that they brought. You know, for example, are people clear that it's not just one big amorphous festival? There are all sorts of festivals in Edinburgh, all with different audiences, different themes, and different focuses. Importantly, it was felt there needs to be more consistency of message from all stakeholder groups, clearly communicated links between policy and strategy. Collaboration was another area where potential solutions were found. I'm running out of time, so I'll just whiz through these final slides. And there were potential solutions noted around that. As we can see here, these included a need to clarify different stakeholders' responsibilities and their roles, particularly around important areas like safety. It was recognised there's a need to build trust and a collective voice. And then back to the issues around space and time. Could there be a collective exploration of the spread of tourism and festivals across places in the city? Potential solutions around community. There were a number here that were raised, call for collective approaches, champions embedded within communities to build trust, working together to ensure representative and engaged functional groups. Exploring opportunities through working with corporate partners that perhaps have, for example, corporate social responsibility programs in place. This was seen as a potential opportunity. Discussion over how pride could be instilled in residents to try and overcome the negatives. Finally, the need for participatory activities for local community members. Comments came up about community buyouts, spaces for community needs, and thereon. And I think this is all captured here in one of the outputs from the workshop. So just before I finish, there were some examples of good practice. There were many more. These are just a few that were mentioned during the interviews and the workshops. And you can see some of these here. And these are all groups, organisations that involve working with different stakeholders, different communities and different members. You know, everything from Castle Hill Partnership, Forever Edinburgh, the Grassmarket Community Centre had some great examples of good practice to report. Hidden Door, which is a grassroots festival here in Edinburgh. Doors Open Day, Festivals Edinburgh was another one that came up. So there are examples of good practice, and I guess the question is, how could this be harnessed and taken forward? So thank you very much. As I mentioned, we're based in the Tourism Research Centre at Edinburgh Napier. There is a link there if you'd like to find out more about our research.
Thank you very much, Louise. If I could invite all the panel members back up to the stage, and also to be joined by Ian Williamson and Meg Bishop as well. So as with the previous panel, if we can perhaps give the mic to Ian and then to Meg, just to kind of give 2 minutes, kind of a view from the local situation. Thank you.
Hi there. I can never see it. This seems to be working. People are smiling. I'm going to go with that. I'm Ian Williamson. I am Head of Business Growth and Inclusion at the City of Edinburgh Council, and I am working as the Senior Responsible Officer on the Visitor Levy. So I expect lots of really interesting questions on that, in addition to the ones that you've already asked. And part of my daytime job is also to support the city's visitor economy from the council's perspective. We do deliver, as Donald mentioned earlier, 2 of the spokes. So we are the lead on the marketing and promotion of the city. And also, as mentioned earlier here, so we have developed the resident rewards program. So I'd like to hear if someone here has actually heard about that. Has anyone used any of the promotional? Right, so we clearly do have some marketing to do on that. But those are the kind of initiatives that we've been running over the last few years in order to try and connect residents with the benefits that we actually have of having such a vibrant visitor economy, ensuring that people can get access to the various offerings that we have at reduced prices or prior to others, and having special kind of opening nights for residents, etc. So clearly, I think we will get all of you on our mailing lists, and then you will all see the benefits that we have.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Meg Bishop, and I am here on behalf of Living Rent, which is Scotland's tenants' union. I've been a member for the past 6 years or so now, and I've spent a lot of time looking at the ways in which the tourism industry is just one of the ways puts pressure on Edinburgh, which is already a very housing-constrained city. On top of that, I'm also a PhD researcher at the University of Edinburgh in the geography department who looks at, funnily enough, the housing crisis in Scotland and the ways in which that impacts community, particularly how precarity impacts how we're able to organise in our community. So I welcome any questions about the impact of holiday lets and short-term lets on Edinburgh's housing crisis, how that affects the way that Living Rent organises, and our aims and goals and what we would like to see happen in Edinburgh specifically, but happy to talk about Scotland as a whole as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. Okay, I shall pass to Meg. Open the floor.
So this is going to seem like deja vu because this is going to be the same question that was before, but to the correct panel this time. Very much, I love the festival, I'm a big fan of the festival. I'd rather it happen here than anywhere else, and I want to keep it here. But there is obviously big issues that are affecting us with the festival. Namely, I want to hear from the panel about what is being done to try and bring in more locals to events. I went to the Foodies Festival this year, which tried to drive people sort of towards Fetties, which was quite nice, and obviously it was attracting more locals. So I just want to hear what's kind of been happening, what's going on, and what we can do to obviously try and increase some of that as well.
Okay, who wants to take that first? Donald, there we go.
That sounds as if it's coming in my direction. I think it's an excellent question because you've heard a lot about space and time and the congestion at peak periods of the year, and it is clearly an issue. I think two things. One, you asked a question about what was it doing for us as residents in the city, and I think I'm right in saying that about 70 to 80% of the tickets for the festival are sold to UK residents, but more than half of that 70% is local. So the locals are big supporters of the festival and I guess the fringe events, because that's happening right on our doorstep. Elon's mentioned residents' rewards. There has been a whole programme of activity to try and get the festival and fringe organisers to support local residents. So if you book with an EH code, postcode, you get a discount. If you book in the first couple of weekends, quite often it's the first weekend I think is 2 for 1 ticket. So there is an array of kind of projects and initiatives to try and get the locals involved, which is exactly what we want. Speaking about, I don't know whether you're also talking about performers, but I know that the fringe and the festivals are very keen to work with local arts groups to get them involved in the fringe and in the festivals, right the way across the year. So that's.
I know that certainly I come from an arts background as well, and so I know a number of decades ago it certainly was a star vehicle for a lot of young performers to kind of get themselves onto the level. My understanding from a lot of artists today is they're being drowned out by, no offence to anyone in particular, but I don't know, Bognor Regis High School doing their rendition of Rent. They feel washed out amongst 1,000 other performers, and certainly for myself as a tour guide, I make more money in July than I do in August, and I spend more on advertising in August than I do in July. So it's all about trying to bring in more tourists, but I get washed out. I'm another thing to do. there's 6,000 things to do in that month during that time, and I'm just another thing to do. Yeah. So it's a difficulty, you know.
That comes back to the time and space, doesn't it? That what we're trying to do is to spread, you know, the festivals now are not just only on the summer. They go from, you know, there's a New Year, Chinese New Year festival in January, February, and it goes all the way. The winter festival's just about to start. So, you know, the industry, along with the city and along with the operators and the companies who produce these events, are trying to spread them out. You know, it's a strength and a weakness. Edinburgh is known as the Olympics of festivals for the summer period, and we're a worldwide attraction. And you know, while that brings its difficulties, we've got to be very careful that we don't lose this. You know, very careful indeed.
I was just going to say as well that there's also one of the big things that we are doing is trying to work with, if anyone comes and say, I'd love to start a new festival in Edinburgh, most of them will say, I want to be in the city centre in August, because that's where all the people are. And what we're saying is, well, actually, can we talk about maybe, you know, how about Leith in September? What does that sound like? So we are trying to work with anyone looking to come here as well and establish themselves. But we also have to accept that the festivals are individual organisations, and they all also sort of they try and work together as much as they can and try and kind of reflect each other's interests. And all we can do from a council perspective is to facilitate that, work with them, and try and work around and minimise the disruption for our residents and try and increase the benefits for the residents. And I find that really, it is a bit of a conundrum. It's like Donald is saying, we need to be careful so we're not losing, because it is a big part of Edinburgh's identity as well and who we are, but we don't want it to go too far, absolutely. But how do we meet that in that sort of happy middle as well?
Louise, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting conundrum in some ways. You know, how can locals be more involved in the festivals? And when we're talking about the summer festivals, I think a lot of people are really talking about the activity that goes on around the Fringe. It's by far the biggest of the festivals. And from what the others were saying about not losing what that was actually about, the Fringe was actually set up with the ethos of being open access. So, and it still has this line, this mission that anybody can take part in the Fringe. I actually took part in the Fringe myself this year. I put on an exhibition. I'm a visual artist as well as my day job. And it was a lot of work, but I managed to do it. But I couldn't imagine what it would be like trying to put on a series of performances because anyone can take part in the Fringe. And in my opinion, and this is my own personal opinion, this means that the doors are open for these larger organisations to come in and do that. And in a way that is, I think, a little bit excludes local performers who just will not have the means to do that, I guess. However, I mentioned Festivals Edinburgh earlier, and they act as an umbrella organisation for all of Edinburgh's festivals, and would be very clear to point out, I would think, that the festivals all have very different themes, very different ethos behind them, and many of them are very much designed for locals. I think the Science Festival might be one that attracts a lot of local people, and we hear about how many locals buy tickets for the Fringe and the winter festivals and so on, as well as those bringing in lots of tourists.
Meg, I don't know where you want to comment from kind of the cost around accommodation.
Yeah, I mean, speaking as somebody who is no longer a local resident because I've been priced out of the city, I now live in Glenrothes, which was the closest place that I could find where I could afford to live. And I still come into Edinburgh to commute and work. And so we have a lot of members of Living Rent who are performers in the Fringe as well, and they are also struggling to find a place to live and stay. And if they have their colleagues coming up and visiting, the cost of accommodation for them, either in a short-term let or if they wanted to stay longer term, just means it is increasingly more and more difficult for smaller producers and smaller performers to take part in the festival. And I know when it was first designed, it was this the festival was this like chaotic bohemian thing that was meant to be very sort of, was meant to be all-encompassing. And while it has got bigger, and that's wonderful, and I love going to shows whenever I can, it does make it harder for people that don't have the means and the disposable income, particularly those of us who are tenants, are more likely to be precariously employed, probably working in the festival or working jobs in tourism. We can't afford to take part anymore, which is frustrating as much as we want to.
Julian, I don't know if, can I kind of pick on you to what can be learnt out of the sort of the NC 500 and the kind of, as you said, this sort of the reliance in times around, you know, that balance of tourism in rural economies, and what other learnings that can be brought out of that for.
I suppose there's a through line to the theme of the privatization of public space, the privatization of shared resources, and whether it's as a resident of Edinburgh or a former resident of the North Highlands, I did not feel that the profits of that were being reflected in the reality around me. You know, I'm struck, to return to Edinburgh, that community centres in the Old Town, Dummy Dykes, St Anne's, the Cowgate Resource Centre have closed in recent years. There's the closure of the People's Story Museum. I believe that the Cowgate Resource Centre has become the new headquarters of the Fringe Society, and that's almost too poetic of a transformation, in my opinion. So in a time of such hardship, which is most felt by the most vulnerable people, and that goes in the Highlands as well, very much so, we need to challenge the notion of where profits are going, and we need to be seeing more of that locally.
Okay, thank you. We open it up to the floor.
Thank you. My name's Craig Douglas, and I suppose I kind of have a question for you, Meg, and hopefully we'll have coffee later. So I own 4 agencies in Edinburgh that do STLs. Big boo for the bad guy here. I also founded a company called STL Solutions, and we represent over half of the people in Edinburgh who are secondary let owners trying to get planning permission. So we have quite a powerful group behind us, or a lot of people. I want to say, I think it was one of the previous panelists said, today should be about heat and not light. Sorry, light and not heat. And I loved that, because I try and stay away from Twitter, because I watch politicians in Westminster, and it's just a very sad event that we as human beings just say black and another person says white, and there's not really good dialogue. And I really welcome today, I didn't actually know what the Cockburn Association did. I now do, and I'm very, very impressed by, I'm a resident of Edinburgh, and I've got kids, and I want this city to be a wonderful city and remain a wonderful city. I will get there. I just want to lay some ground rules that I'm not going to rant. I don't know, I know the Cockburn Society is aware that I'm going to talk about analysis. Someone in the previous panel said it's really important to do analysis, and we need good data. I think the Cockburn Society have been made aware of a bigger economics report that was published 2 weeks ago. And just to give people a perspective on that regarding figures being wrong, the council and various people said that there were 12,000 holiday lets in Edinburgh. There's actually 1,800 secondary lets. We know those figures from the licensing now. And if the continued legislation continues, we'll have less than 300. And that will be people who have traded for over 10 years and therefore automatically got planning. If not, the council are going to close down those other 1,500. So I suppose one of the questions for the panel is, they currently represent 0.8% of the housing in Edinburgh, and that's considered quite low compared with European standards. What figure do we need of short-term lets to accommodate a city like Edinburgh? No one's ever said that. The biggest one for me, Meg, is I'm a social landlord as well, and there are 8,000 empty homes in Edinburgh that I'm just astounded that, you know, there's only 1,800 secondary lets in Edinburgh. I want to solve the housing problem for people. I worked as a support worker for 10 years with a mental health charity and a homeless charity as well. I just feel the focus on scapegoating holiday lets is distracting from the real issue, which is let's get people into housing. I'm not sure of my question.
Well, okay, let's turn it into what's the housing angle on this?
That's fine. I'm pretty sure that was directed at me, so I can take that. So yeah, I also read the bigger economics report as well, and I found it quite interesting. And you mentioned the sort of confusion around the number of short-term holiday lets in the city of Edinburgh. And yes, I was looking at the numbers for the Save Self-Catering campaign, and you were right that they say now that there are under 2,000 full-time self-catering units. Before the licensing scheme, that was actually 1,285. So since the licensing scheme, that number has actually increased. While that's not catastrophic, there has actually been an increase since the licensing. And these are only the numbers of rate-paying self-catering units, and that's not what most short-term and most holiday lets are. So inside Airbnb, for example, which is a publicly available data, shows that there are just under 6,000 units in Edinburgh, of which about 70% are entire properties, and those are ones that have been listed on a website such as Airbnb. Now, obviously, this data isn't perfect as well, but that does make that number increase quite a lot. Well, and I'm also completely on your side in the number of vacant lets that could be used and should be used when we have a housing crisis and a homelessness crisis in the city like we do. I'm under no illusion that short-term lets are, I don't believe they're the only reason that we have a housing crisis in this city, but it's another straw that could potentially break the camel's back. And this is not me saying, I hope your business is damned and I don't care what happens because you want to make it work and earn a living in the city as well. You have a right to do that. But the housing crisis is pushing other people out from doing that. So that is my angle on that. So I would say the numbers are difficult. They're probably more than what the Save Self-Catering campaign is saying, probably less than what Edinburgh Council is saying, but the fact that we don't know is what's making this so challenging for us to address as campaigners and also as lobbyists for the short-term let industry.
Can I give you information on that?
Yeah.
So the figures can no longer be disputed. Whatever is on Airbnb, if there's anything more than 1,800, they're operating illegally. What this legislation has done is creating a massive black market, and we don't want that at all. That means they're not legislated, they've not got safety checks in place. Before the festival, there was a Facebook group, it's probably still there, and there was 10,000 properties on there advertising, saying, we'll let you in. Now, one part of me feels sorry for performers and said, go knock yourself out. The other says to me, hold on, that's what the legislation was created to avoid. But all these people, these extra 10,000, they were property owners like yourself, yep, Patrick, who were renting their house out for a temporary basis. So I want to, it's really important. You cannot be operating illegally in this city, and there's only 1,800 on the licensing. So if they're still on Airbnb, I'm not a fan of Airbnb at all. They give us a bad name, the professional operators. So I think it is important to state, it is 1,800, and the others are illegal. There's nothing we can do about that. But I am really curious, see the 8,000 empty properties, are they all council-owned? And why can't we get them back onto the marketplace?
So let's go along the panel and say, so where's the interface into housing issues and...
Well, if I can make a couple of general points. First of all, I think you referred to the bigger report that came out recently last week for the study of the short-term lets, which Fiona Campbell has shared with the ETAG group last week. If I can just make a general point, Airbnb is a platform. It doesn't own anything. It's not an operator. And I think there needs to be a distinction made between Airbnb properties and perhaps professionally led self-catering companies that have been in existence in Edinburgh for decades and have provided a very useful resource to the variety of visitors that want to come to Edinburgh. Not everybody wants to come to Edinburgh and live in a hotel, particularly families and perhaps performers. And we always said at the start of the debate about short-term lets, let's not degrade the offer of the variety of accommodation in Edinburgh. And I guess that's where the council has come in with their licensing scheme to allow, the proper licensing of professionally led accommodation providers, which do a very good job.
Just to start off with saying, I do not work in the licensing team or planning team, so I am not in any way, shape or form sort of involved in the development of the policy. It does obviously impact the work that we do around tourism, and we've kept a close eye on it in terms of developing the visitor levy as well. We need to understand the impact that the policy will have on visitor levy potential income as well. And we have been working very closely with the team in terms of understanding the impact on things like performers. We want to understand the impact on families that are coming. I'm a mother, I travel with my children. I love staying in a short-term let because it's so much easier when I can put my children down and then sit and have a drink on the balcony or whatever. But we do also need to accept that we have a housing crisis in Edinburgh, and there are a lot of residents just now that can't afford to live in the city. They want to work and want to live in the city, but they can't afford it. And I think we spoke earlier to Patrick, who was giving an example of his own house, which I thought that's the policy in action. That's how we should be working. We've seen a large number of housing stock coming back to the residential market, which is helpful. And I do appreciate that there are providers that are getting stuck in the middle. And I know that there's 10-year grandfathering right. I know that's caused a lot of issues. And I know that the team in the licensing and planning teams are looking at how can we address these issues. But again, the main reason for the policy is actually twofold. One is to return housing stock to the residents, but also to regulate the market that's not been regulated for a very long time. And we've seen that time and time again with visitors that are coming and saying, how on earth can you allow this to go on? People being allowed to stay in flats that aren't really fit for purpose. So there is that element to it as well. I'm not really sure where I'm trying to get to with this, but I just want to say that I hear you and I understand the issues. I also want to just highlight that the bigger report, I know it's marketed as an independent report, but it was commissioned by short-term lets sector, so it's not entirely independent as such. And there are parts of the methodology that I would question in terms of they have not taken any of it. There's a strong assumption there that there is no replacement factor for, and what would these visitors, where would they stay if they weren't staying in a short-term let? There's an assumption that the whole short-term lets market would just eradicate that whole sector, and it's not entirely true either. So I would just urge everyone to take a pinch of salt. All research that we're doing should always, or all research that we're reading should always be taken with a pinch of salt. Make informed decisions and choices based on wider data.
No, we'll need to we need to move on with another.
Just quickly, it's still on our website. We organised a conference on Airbnb and short-term lets in 2018. There's still a lot of useful data on that. And the most recent mini conference we organised was with the student housing crisis as well. So I think it's important as we talk about this is that the housing issue is actually very, very complicated in this kind of city, and it affects many people. And maybe what we need to do is to organise our next mini conference on how to deal with the housing crisis in Edinburgh. So, the answer's on a postcard for that. I can let you know the raw figures. It's slightly higher. There's 8,000 vacant council or publicly owned properties. There's also an additional approximately 8,000 empty houses which aren't held on that account. And that could be anything from properties that are on the market, not just in a void period in between sale, to much longer term ones. So it's a much more complicated kind of picture behind it. And that's why solving it, I think, is a bigger issue. But that's maybe just a little advertisement for another conference. So I think... Carol. Thank you. There we go. It's already done. Good.
Hello, my name is Carol Nimmo, and I'm the erstwhile chair of the Newtown and Broughton Community Council. So I'm here as a resident and working for residents. And I'm disappointed. I was hoping I wouldn't be, but I'm disappointed at the time residents and communities have been mentioned, but there's been no really deep involvement. We were, first of all, residents are concerned with mainly supporting the tourism levy, but wanting to know what was going to come out of it. And it looks like a little bit for residents might be in the bit that sort of city operation and infrastructure, if we look deep. No wonder we're wary and sceptical. I think we'll have to dig very deep to find anything really real about residents and communities. And then coming to ETAG. Residents groups have long wanted a proper place at the table with ETAG. And you mentioned residents and communities, but they've never really properly been involved in ETAG. And there's certainly, although you mentioned it and the words were there on the screen, we come to the hub and the spokes, there's no spokes for residents and communities. So, and then we come down to Caroline, responsible residents. Are we supposed to spend our time picking up litter? I mean, I would consider a lot of us very responsible residents in Edinburgh, but nothing seems to be working for us. It almost seems to be working against us. So that's why no one wants to deal with community councils, because we're always moaning and groaning, but that's because nothing seems to be, you're not listening to us and you're not helping us. And, Louise, your strategy, I don't know how many community people attended your workshops, but it seemed to me the result was, let's give community people tickets for things, just to encourage. That's how it came over on the screen. It was, let's sort of buy them. And Ellen, it was, do you know about us? I would rather you were saying, tell you. So the residents really properly had a voice in all of this, and I would consider that if we did, we might get more light on all of this. So I would like to properly hear where you think there might be real resident and community involvement.
So I'm going to ask, can we perhaps direct it to Louise and then Julian on how to properly, how we draw out the resident voice?
Yes, well, I'll start out. What I was talking about in my presentation was really a summary of an initial research project, and I really hope it didn't come across like the solution was to give residents tickets. We did include residents in the research, and they took part in the workshops. We had people who were residents, and purely residents, but others who were residents who worked within different sectors or were also community council and group members as well. I can't answer the broader question about visitor levy and communities and residents, but I think what our research has illustrated is the need for open communication between different groups and for different stakeholders to do their utmost best to ensure that they are bringing residents on board with them and speaking to community groups. Communication, collaboration, and those sorts of activities are absolutely essential. We are hoping to continue our project and look at this in a more in-depth way, so we will be looking for more residents to take part in the project and look at this in a more in-depth manner. I should perhaps pass on to someone who can discuss the visitor levy in more detail, though.
Absolutely. So first thing to say is just that we are also restricted by the legislation in terms of what we're allowed to invest visitor levy in. Any income from the visitor levy has to be spent at things that are mainly for the use of or directly used by visitors to the city. And the key word there is obviously mainly. So what we're trying to look at are how do we ensure that we can invest in things that will benefit residents and visitors. So things like we've talked earlier about graffiti, cleaning, upkeep, general safety, keeping the city clean, green and safe. That's a major focus of our investment. £5 million a year in repaying that on building housing for our residents. I think it's perhaps a bit of a confusion if there's an impression that we're not investing in things that are mainly for our residents. We are having a very, very strong focus on ensuring that residents will benefit from the visitor levy. The idea was always that a visitor levy is there to ensure that visitors contribute and support the city that they're visiting. And our research show that that is absolutely what visitors want to do as well. And that's their understanding of that's what you're doing. When you come to a city, you pay a visitor levy, you pay a tourist tax, whatever you want to call it. It's in order to kind of support the city that you've just visited. And that's very much what we're focusing on in our investment program. In terms of seeking engagement or seeking views from residents, that's exactly what we're doing just now. We've been out doing lots of engagements sessions, one-to-ones. We've been doing wider briefing sessions. We have done surveys. We've got an open consultation open just now. And community councils are invited to have a seat at the table on the Visitor Levy Forum. And obviously our elected members, who will be the ones that are making the final investment decisions, are elected by you all. So we do hope that we are reflecting the wills and the needs of the residents. That's very much a very strong focus. But we can't use the visitor levy to invest in health and social care or to invest in new swings in the playground, because it does need to be mainly for the use of visitors. But we also need to find that, as I say, that sweet spot of things that will benefit both sides and make sure that the residents get the benefits as well as the visitors.
Donald, could we perhaps pick up on the sort of the hub and spoke model?
Yes. I think before we came up with the hub and spoke model, we agreed a set of strategic outcomes from our strategy, and it's very clear in our strategy that people are very important and central to this and the better quality of life. So I tried to make the difference from the previous strategy, which was all about growth, whereas actually we're now recognising that this is about working in collaboration with the city, including the residents, about how tourism can fit within a successful economy and provide benefits to both the resident and the visitor. The key aspects will come through our visitor management and also, I suppose, destination marketing promotion, where we will be, engaging with the communities about what they want to see in terms of how, if we can spread tourism around the city. There's a big question: do they want it? If they do, how do we go about that? Edinburgh Market advertises the neighbourhoods and villages around Edinburgh quite extensively, and the whole issue of, during COVID especially, about live local and shop local was a very important aspect of the promotion at that time, and that continues today. But I think your challenge is correct. I'm not going to shy away from that. I would agree with you that the industry as a whole has not consulted with the communities and residents as well as they might have in the past. I'm setting out to change that. One of the first aspects of when I got the role as chair, I sought out Terry and came to see Terry, and Terry said I was the first person he'd ever seen from the visitor levy, the visitor economy before. And we're going tomorrow night. I don't know whether you'll be there, but we're going tomorrow night. We've got an online session with myself and Karen, who's sitting opposite you there, with the Association of Community Councils. I would also say that we have had a representative of community councils on the strategy implementation group, which oversees the operation of this for the last 3 years. So we have started that process. I don't think it's good enough, and I will take the challenge on board and see whether we can improve it for you.
Okay, so we've got a question over here. Yeah, on there, and then we'll come over here. Terry.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pedro. I am a tourist guide for over 20 years. all around Scotland. I am living here in Edinburgh for over 30 years now. But what I want to say is that, you know, I heard a lot of promises. It's not what I have seen. The first 15 years of work, I really enjoy showing Scotland, the history, the beautiful places, Edinburgh. But in the last 5, 10 years, things started to change. And I am becoming a little bit, I don't know, different. I am uncomfortable now to guide because I feel parties of inviting more people to see the beautiful country that is not that beautiful now. In Edinburgh, you know, I invite you to go to a few closets, particularly paisley closets around. Have a look inside, what you see. A big destruction of old building, and now big new building. We are replacing the local people and the local building for over commercial, I think. I'm sorry about my language, it's not my first, but I feel very strongly that I'm not loving my job anymore. And it may be because I am over 30 now, and I become a little bit grumpy. But anyway, the reality is, what I saw in the past, it was a beautiful country. The history is still there, but it's being replaced in order to enhance the business, I would say, but I don't think that is right. And you have been saying a lot of things here, but it's not what I see. Just a few, no. Just a few things. I would like to see benefit for the cities of Edinburgh and the tourists, for both of them. How? By creating or building a new toilets, safe and clean toilets, particularly in the city center, with attendance. Also, I would like to see the management of the public places for the people of Edinburgh and Scotland. Not only Princess Street, but Princess Street Garden, but beyond. And also to put a little more attention about the roads. That will benefit the city of Edinburgh. If you want, or if we want to benefit the people of Edinburgh, we have to provide some benefits. A new safe toilet, better collection of litter, and do something about housing the homeless of the city center. You go to Princess Street, which is in the past was a beautiful, attractive street with shops and so on. Look at now. So I don't see much benefit from that. Sorry, that's everything.
I think it's a good statement. I think I'm coming over to Donald, but as I go, we had an online question from some of our people on Zoom asking the question about the engagement of the tourism sector with other major events, such as the Six Nations, such as major concerts. Taylor Swift came out, and just how that wider integration of the visitor economy personifies itself. So you can maybe think about that while I hand over to Donald.
Thanks very much. Can I pick up the point that Carol was making first of all? Because I do think if the community councils are not as engaged as they feel they should be with the council, that will be a serious concern for Cammy Day. And I would point you in Cammie's direction. I've already sent him a message to say you'll be in touch. So I used to sit down twice a year with the community councils at a forum in the city chambers, and that kind of mechanism worked pretty well in those days. I don't know if it's fallen away over time or whatever, but I think Cammie will want to pick that up. Just in terms of the tourism industry, I think it's a fantastic industry, and I'm a huge fan of it. It's great at marketing, but it's terrible at communication. And I think the question that was raised about the festivals illustrates that perfectly. The council does a resident survey every year to about 4,000 people. It's the biggest and best of its kind in Scotland. And that survey, recent figures shown that 72% of people in Edinburgh think that the festivals make Edinburgh a better place to live. That's not that they think festivals are a good thing or quite entertaining, it's that they make Edinburgh a better place to live. Now, that figure has dropped. It was as high as 80%, and I think that's a concern. But I think we do have to, in the industry, take more responsibility in order to communicate more effectively the impacts and benefits of the tourism industry. And I think that point illustrates it perfectly. And the point that was made about ticket sales is absolutely right. The biggest bunch of people who buy tickets for the festivals are Edinburgh residents. They love the festivals. And by the way, where most of those events and activities take place in the city centre, the figures are even higher in terms of people who think it makes the city a better place to live.
Could we pick up the point then? How do we communicate better around these issues?
I suppose part of that question is, how do people want to be communicated with? So what are we missing then? So if we're not communicating clearly enough, we are trying. It's not for lack of trying, but what is it then that we're missing? So we're trying. We cannot physically knock on every single door in Edinburgh. That's not going to happen. But how do we? What is it that we're missing? How do we include you all? How do we make sure that we are communicating effectively?
Julian, what can we learn from deep participative community-based engagement from the Highlands?
Well, I think that communication needs to come with action. And I think from my experience working quite closely with residents in the heavily touristed area, there's a frustration with an abdication of responsibility that comes with benefiting from tourism. I saw it time and time again with press releases issued by North Coast 500 Limited, which said that their job is just to draw tourists there. Everything else has to come from public bodies or community organisations. And to me, that strikes me not as a failure of communication, but an abdication of responsibility. In terms of communication with residents, again, that has to result in action. You know, I was frustrated working within an academic context in a limited amount of time, working on my own with limited funding, and having to produce a thesis at the end of it, that the amazing data that was generated through this collaborative process couldn't be directed towards policymakers to the degree that I wanted it to. But that is what's important. You know, it's the outcomes that's important. So it's all well and good to talk and share those insights with you, but I'm aware that my next step needs to be in that direction, towards outcomes. But I want to underline that it's a two-way street, and that the people who profit from tourism need to be contributing to solutions as well. You know, I was struck in the Highland Council area that the measure that they came up with to address the issue of camper vans and wastage and so on was a voluntary £40 fee that you could pay if you wanted to, that would go towards providing facilities. And the uptake on this voluntary fee was minimal. And so most of the funding that's taken to create public toilets, lay-bys, car parks, overnight airs and things like that has come from local community initiative. So I'm glad in that respect that the visitor levy seems to be a more aggressive step in that direction. Assertive.
Just one point in communication. I mentioned it briefly in my presentation, that we're starting to work with all the members that sit around the ETAG full group table about collecting their own data in terms of who their customers are, how many they are, where they come from. And we did use this network during COVID. I think if I remember rightly, if you count up all the connections that all of the organisations have in Edinburgh, it gets to several million people who they have on their database, their subscriber lists, their email addresses, and people who come to their website. That's an enormous powerhouse that we could use to communicate, not just the museum talking to their supporters about the museum, but talking in general about how good Edinburgh is in terms of a place to come and visit, not just the museums, but the whole of Edinburgh. So that might give us a vehicle to shout a little bit more about the success of the visitor economy.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for waiting patiently.
Thank you. My name is Ken Robertson. I'm from the Edinburgh Association of Community Councils, and I'm pleased to see Newtown and Broughton represented here today. A couple of points. First of all, I'd like to thank all the participants. The presentations have been really interesting, and a lot has emerged. I understand full well, or pretty well, the dynamics of the whole business. And you'll find that, in essence, most people will. Most people understand that there has to be a trade-off, as within business, against communities, residents, against vested interests, if you like. But the fundamental issue is that residents, the people who live here, the people for whom the council is striving to make this a better place to live, residents have to see some wins out of this. Yeah, it's things like litter, graffiti, broken pavements, undue congestion, buildings up the road that have been blocking a carriageway for 5 years, and nothing being done about it. And indeed, relating to that, unfortunately, careless jaywalking across that particular section of the street, which is almost bound to result in some kind of accident at some point. So residents need to see some wins, not just in terms of the commitment to a new housing build, but basically tidying the place up for those that live here. Now, who do you speak with? Who do you consult with? Well, community councils are, quote, have a key role in community planning in Edinburgh. However, the unfortunate thing is that community councils themselves, for the most part, are strained. Strained just by passage of time, as people retire from activity there, and strained because although they may feel they're heard, they understand pretty well that frequently they're not listened to. So the related point is that the council, in a sense, has to be seen to listen. We'll tie that in with quick wins, or easy wins, or some wins, any wins at all. But the coda is that community councils are strained. Now, we're arriving at a pivotal point in the first quarter of next year when community council elections take place. And I would say that in the vast number of cases, community councils desperately need reinforcing with new participants and new members. So I noticed that Councillor Cameron has left the building, but I would say to those who have an involvement in that, that it's absolutely essential that the City Council does its very best to promote these elections and to promote the idea of civic participation as a means of getting community voices into the debate. Thank you.
I think that we've got time for one more question, and then we'll two. Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much. All I was going to say was we've had lots of interesting debates about research, data, lies, damn statistics, and so forth. And all I was going to say was the possibly one outcome from today might be finding a way that we can, as I think you put it really nicely, Julian, how can we get a deeper understanding of impact and have residents, all the different interests are involved in this, a deeper understanding and more time to explore people's stories. I mean, surveys and high-level stuff is great, but you need some of the kind of work that you were talking about as well, living and working. And actually, council people could learn an awful lot just by being in an area for a while, hanging out for a while, just talking to people informally. You know, we don't really do much ethnographic stuff in councils. So I think there's room for all of these different kinds of research. And also, I think, as you put it, Ellen, you know, you said take data with a pinch of salt, and I would say, yeah, I've maybe put it in a slightly different way, just saying always be critical of every data. We always have to be critical about it. And an outcome could be maybe a way to find that we can share the different types of research that are going on in different spheres, and maybe finding better ways to research involving the residents themselves and suggesting how we might do research in the future and what we can learn from it. And as you say, every bit of research needs to lead to action, otherwise why are we doing it?
Okay, final question.
More than a question, I just wanted to add the Historic Environment Scotland has got a responsible tourism framework which sets the aspiration for the organisation to manage heritage and tourism differently. And one example was done, practical example was done in Doon. Doon Castle suffered from over-tourism, from the so-called Outlander effect, and the local community was pretty much cut out. Thanks to the involvement of the local community and also the rural fund, we managed to hold co-creation consultations where it has took pretty much a step back, and the social and cultural capital was valorized by the community itself. So I wonder if maybe the same kind of consultation could be held in Edinburgh as well.
Okay, thank you at that point. Okay, I think we're probably naturally coming to a close, and on the basis that we also have to clear the room fairly quickly, but it sort of falls to me to, well, I was going to try and summarise. I don't know that it's terribly easy to try and summarise today. I think there's, I wouldn't want to say something as fatuous as it's all a bit complicated, because I think it is, but I think what we have importantly done today is set a kind of a positive on neutral space for nuanced exploration, and recognising that nuanced exploration of the issues needs to continue, and that communication I think has changed and will continue to change and evolve over the next few years. It's changed fundamentally from a pre-pandemic to a post-pandemic situation, and the expectations around power and place and the voice of communities and the input that's expected and the responsibility that falls to individuals, civic bodies and organisations is changing and is continuing to change. We very helpfully heard at the start of the afternoon the context set by Harold, John, Caroline, Angela and Patrick, thinking around information and data, thinking around our definitions of what we understand tourism is and what it's become, and the shift from what we think of as sustainability to responsibility. And in the latter session this afternoon around capacity management, we've ranged quite widely across housing, across regulation, across money flows, across power, and across those spatial and temporal aspects. I think this has been a really great afternoon, and I'd like to add my thanks to the Cockburn Association for setting the space to be able to hold this discussion. I think it's the start of ongoing conversations, ongoing research, ongoing engagement and platforms for debate. And at this point, I'll hand over to Terry to think about what the next steps are and reflections from a Cockburn point of view.
Thank you for being. I think the simple answer is I don't know. We'll have to discuss. But when we set out to hold a conference on responsible tourism, in fact, I met individually with all of the panelist speakers. We started off with two bookends to what we wanted to accomplish in the discussion. The first was that tourism is very important to the city, socially, economically, and culturally. And secondly, the other bookend is that there are issues around management and capacity and kind of issues. And I think that we've heard both of those things come together, and it's in bringing things closer into that middle space that all the solutions will come out from it. And I think that there's already been a few interesting points got raised from it. Sorry, we're back online now. And just how challenging it's been just for me personally to have this microphone and not be giving it over to myself to have a go at it, because there's so many different kind of facets to it. And what I hope we'll be able to do is to take some of the discussions and collaborations and begin building on them so that we can create the meaningful dialogue, and to begin thinking about the quick wins from a community point of view, from a tourist sector point of view. Because I think that they're all there, they're just not being brought to the kind of fore. So there's some really useful things. And I know, just as an example, when we had our discussions with kind of Anna and Louise, that there's an opportunity for us to collaborate with some of your research too as well. So out of this stuff, good things will come. So really, that's our objective to this meeting, was to begin just airing the subject and bringing it together. I think it's probably one of the first times in this city that a tourism conference has been organised from a civic perspective as opposed to an industry perspective. So that, I think, just is an indication that we can bring things together and do appropriate kind of things. The next stage is for us, I think the microphone's just dropped off again. It's okay, shall I just shout anyway? Right, he wants to do, no, there it is, it's come back. I think the battery is beginning to die. So it's a good incentive to kind of shut up. We'll be producing a conference report, as we will with this, and we've been recording this as well. So we'll release both of those at the same time, just in fairness for delivery. As part of the conference report, there will be an addendum to it. You'll notice that we've deliberately kept ourselves off the platform, because it wasn't about us having a conversation, it was about all of you. But we'll be reflecting on what's said and perhaps be suggesting where we think some of the next steps will go forward as well. So perhaps opportunity for a further set of discussions. So with that being said, I'd just like to kind of put a few things out, as one always has to do. First of all, my huge thanks to Ian, Professor Ian Baxter, for acting as a very able conference chair. Thank you very much, Ian. I'd like to thank very much as well the Heriot University's Confucius Institute for Business and Communication. There's an interesting link there, isn't it? Business and communication together. For supporting kind of this, it's been really quite useful. I want to particularly earmark a few individuals. We've got James hiding in the back of the room, Assistant Director of the Cockburn, who's been tweeting kind of madly. And in particular, my colleague Bridget Golden, who is the one who really kind of set this all up. These things take a real, yes, indeed. We all know they take an effort, and that's where the effort kind of went, so thank you. And Nathan too, for actually ensuring that as much of the IT stuff has worked as has been possible, so thanks. Thanks to St. Augustine's for kind of hosting us. Critically, thanks to all of the speakers and panellists who've all given their time freely to have this conversation. And they didn't have to, but they did. And that is, I think, says something really important about the desire to continue this debate and make sure that tourism in all the aspects works best for Edinburgh and everybody who lives here. So I think that's a really important message. And of course, critically, thanks to all of you for taking up this afternoon to come be with us here, and for all those people who've been online. So everybody, please give yourself a round of applause. Thank you very much for the Cockburn. And we're ending early, and I think my final task is, although we haven't formally named the conference pub, I think for those of you who wish to retire soon to continue the debate, it'll be in George IV Bridge Pub, or whatever it's called anyway, just around the corner. We'll see when we get there. Thanks, and have a safe journey home.